Hi, thank you for joining us on the Top Brass again. This is our special Valentine's Day edition. I'm Jennifer Goldman, and this is my dear friend Kirsten Dueck. She is the Senior Program Officer for the Path Foundation. Joining me today, we're going to talk a little bit about grants. Good morning, Kirsten. Thank you.
Good morning, Jen. It's so good to see you. Happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you. Happy Valentine's Day to you. I was noticing earlier how warm and cozy your room looks.
Thank you. It is definitely one of the benefits of being able to work from home now, sort of a new reality.
Yeah, a lot of natural light coming in there behind you. So thank you for joining me. I sent you an email originally that I'm going to tell everybody about just so they have a little bit of background. Talking about grants and nonprofit. And now I can't speak all nonprofit organizations. And talking about some of the myths, misconceptions that nonprofit leaders have about getting grants. To give everybody a little bit of my background, I've helped a lot of nonprofit organizations, and when they find me and realize that I'm a nonprofit consultant, one of the first questions they ask is, do you do grant writing? Which scares me. I'm never sure what's going to come after that question. And so yes, I can. But a lot of them, the next things they want to know are things that I realize they've either not gotten grants previously, or maybe they've applied and been turned down. Because then they'll ask me, like, well, how much can you find us? And, when I ask about their budgets, how much can you get us? Like they're just looking for the pot of gold. And when I ask them about their programs, I get the look like, I have three heads. Because I feel like a lot of nonprofits, and this is not every single one of them, I don't want to pick on people or make them feel bad, but I feel like a lot of nonprofits treat grants like it's winning the lottery. Like, let's just shoot 6 numbers at them and hope we win. So can you tell us maybe a little bit about, first of all, your background, and you can introduce yourself more formally than I did, but also maybe some of the mistakes you see in nonprofits and grants?
Sure. So as Senior Program Officer, well, let me tell you a little bit about the Path Foundation, which is going to lead actually to any insight that I might share in grant seeking. The Path Foundation is what's called a health conversion foundation. We were created out of the sale of a local hospital. And so that's what created our endowment. And for that reason, we're a very place-based funder. We work in a fairly small footprint in North Central Virginia. And the reason that I bring that up is because understanding who your funder is, your potential funder is going to be one of the most valuable ways to spend your time as you're moving into building a relationship with them and seeking funding from them. I think it's so apt that we're having this conversation on Valentine's Day because it really is all about relationships, understanding who you are, understanding who your partner is, and thinking of it as a partnership. So one of the things that I always like to remember is that I've also been on the other side of the table. I am currently a grant maker for this foundation, but I came there more than a decade ago as a major gifts fundraiser, and always try to keep in mind where our grantees or potential grantees are coming from and remember what it's like to be grant seeking. It's a relationship, but it's a funny kind of relationship, right? And it's different from many others.
No, you're right. It is a relationship, and I don't think a lot of people see it that way. At least I think when you're under the gun on this side of the table and you are trying to find the right grant and trying to put the application together, you think of it as, just almost an us and them kind of thing. Looking for that person that you can persuade, please, and beg, and and you're right. I like the way you put that it is about building a relationship. And so, what's the best way to do?
Well, I think it's one of the best ways is just the mindset that you're in when you start, which is remembering that the grant makers in most cases are nonprofits too. And so you and your organization are going to have a mission that really drives you, that you're really committed to, and you have a vision for what you're trying to achieve in your community or for your clients or for the people who are turning to you for help or for your sector, right? And in that way, you have that very much in common with your funder because they're also a nonprofit. and they are looking to do certain things in the community to achieve good in the community. They're actually required by the IRS, right? Their status as funders depends on their ability to do good in the community to achieve charitable benefit. So you're actually on the same team, right? And I think if you go into that conversation or that relationship or the application process, remembering that, keeping that in mind, it can be so much more fruitful and so much more helpful and frankly, so much less stressful as the applicant. Remember that you actually are on the same side. Then, like any relationship, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to make it work. And so taking the time to get to know the funding organization as well as you can is really worth the investment of time. You can spend hours, days, weeks, years writing applications and sending them out into the universe. If you took just a portion of that time, getting to know, doing the research on your funders and reaching out to them and trying to establish as much as possible, establish a kind of one-on-one conversation with them and getting to know each other personally as well as corporately. That's a really good investment of time.
And it's a really good time saver too, because if you pick up the phone and you say, look, I've got this program that I'm working on, I have this idea, whatever, wherever you are, and you start talking to funders, then, they might immediately say, this is great, but not for us. And then you can move on, or they might say, oh my gosh, I really love this. If you could add this element or whatever, it would be perfect. And, then have that conversation. It saves you from putting forth applications to organizations and foundations that aren't aligned with you. And so you save a lot of time that way, but also in having those conversations, a lot of funders will tell you exactly what they're looking for. If you did this, or if you did that, if you tweaked this, or, came at me this time, it helps you form the direction and the timeline. One of the things that I've noticed when nonprofits come to me wanting, someone to help them with grants is that they've found this opportunity. They've seen one online and the deadline is in 30 days and they have no formal program for it. And so then you're running behind the 8 ball and you're trying to build this thing and package it just perfectly for this one particular opportunity that's coming up on this, one particular deadline. And then you're just rushing and frustrated, and you spend an inordinate amount of time on something that may not really be right at all. And so I've always tried to counsel them on, number one, build the program and find the funders, because it's I don't want to say time consuming, but it can take a lot of time just in building the right program for your organization, finding the appropriate funders who want to partner with you on it. And even if there is, a particular opportunity that funder has that has a deadline, it might take you a year to get there between the application process, the decision, all the tweaks, getting to the contract, and then getting, any funds expelled. It might be a year. So it's an investment that would be best bet, I think, in time building that relationship, instead of just looking for that grant that's, deadline in 30 days, let's get some money.
I think that's such good advice, Jen. I mean, it's such good advice, and it's calling all kinds of things to mind. So I'm going to try to be methodical.
Go.
One of them is, and I know this feeling, so it's so familiar, right? Of like, I've got to get these applications out, right? And that's almost frantic feeling of wanting to get an application in because there's a deadline and because you can. And if it helps to take some of the pressure off that, right? If you're talking about an application that is really a long shot, or that is to an organization that may not be the best match, or you don't know very well, if it takes some pressure off, remember this. An hour lunch with a local donor who you actually know may very well be a better use of the time than the 30 hours that it takes to prepare an application to somebody who doesn't yet know you, right? And so you can do both, right? You can spend, if you feel that urgency to be out there and talking and connecting and fundraising, by all means act on it, but be smart about it, right? So if while you're doing the long game of cultivating a donor you don't yet know, also be doing the short game of cultivating a donor that you do know. And I think that is more likely to kind of convert into actual support along the way. Now you've got your pipeline of the long ones, and you are working with the folks on the ground who do know you, right? So you're constantly fundraising, but you're doing it on multiple tracks.
I like that.
Actually, I'll stop there rather than just talking and see if that brings up any other thoughts.
I was waiting to see. I was like, okay, what was the rest of them? No, I love that. And I posted earlier today because I think I'm just going to make a whole week out of grants and advice about grants and grant writing. And I posted something about how, it's so much easier just to pick up the phone and have a 30-minute conversation with a funder, and that I don't know many nonprofit leaders realize how many funders are willing to spend time with you, and that time is better spent for them than in going through whatever size application you're about to send them to find out that this is not a match at all. Either your organization and your mission isn't a match, or your program isn't a match. And I don't know that many leaders realize how easy it is to access and talk to a funder.
I think that's right. There are a handful. It's true. There are a handful of foundations, either because they're too big, or they're too remote, or it's not a good match, or whatever. I mean, it is true that some folks, it's going to be difficult to have that kind of one-on-one conversation with. But I think many fundraisers and many smaller nonprofits would be astonished to realize how much most of us love to hear from you.
Yes.
It is literally my job. I mean, I'm actually literally paid to take your call and to have those conversations.
Do we want to put your phone number up on the screen? Call now.
And it is good use of time. It's a way to get to know each other. And there's so much ground that you can cover in a 30-minute conversation back and forth. And if you're lucky, and you're working with a program officer who is open in that way, they will understand that part of their job, part of my job, right, is helping to anticipate match or figure out where are points of alignment and where are points of non-alignment, right? So as you said, if you're coming with a great idea, we can talk it through together. And we can talk through various grant guidelines, and I can help navigate, this is a good match, this maybe isn't such a good match, this was designed for this kind of thing, right? Sort of help interpret what each of those grant opportunities may be for, and see if we can do some sort of internal matchmaking between your priorities and the foundation's priorities. The other thing, too, is you can start by just looking and reading and researching whatever is available. We're nonprofits, so we're required to post everything. It's pretty transparent, actually. Look up our 990s. Like, there's, even foundations that aren't as obsessive as we are about publishing every single grant we've ever made on our website. Nevertheless,
we all do a really good job of that,
right? And so there's a lot of recon that you can do and get a real good feel for the culture and the priorities and the way of working and the size of grants, right?
That's a big one too.
That a funder has
people
made
who
before.
want, $100,000 and they're looking at grants that are 25,000. And a lot of people don't think about that. Is you can't just go out and find a pot of gold. You're going to be looking. You may have a program that needs $100,000 of funding, but you may find a grant that's perfect, but only is $25,000 maximum. And so I'm gonna go with the old quote, size matters.
Yeah.
And it's okay. I mean, you may just need to find other donors and other ways of funding that program. It doesn't mean you shouldn't get the $25,000 grant, but be aware that when you ask for 100,000 to a funder who's only willing to give you 25, that doesn't mean you shouldn't run that program, or it doesn't mean it's not worth it. It just means that you have to plan the rest of the funding from some other source. And I think, a lot of people look at it as, if I get a grant, I can get whatever amount of money I want or need. And there's a lot of restrictions that come with, and not all, but most. You can't use it for general operating funds, most grants. You can't pay salaries out of things like that, that I don't think, to me, these are the things that I hear nonprofit leaders say, that I think they just don't understand a lot of grants.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, that's part of that research project. And I actually often will think of it as kind of a puzzle or a picture. So my background is unusual. I'm an art historian, so I do tend to think very visually, right? So, when you're looking at an image like this, it's made up of all kinds of shapes and colors, right? That's your fundraising strategy, right? There is pretty much no such thing as landing the big one, right? No, you know what I mean?
The pot of gold, as I've been saying.
So it's worth thinking about, how do these various foundations or private donors or public funding, how do they fit together to form the picture that is your strong organization? What is your fundraising strategy, and how do these various ones fit together? And then you flip it around and you look at, like, all right, so what is each of them looking for? What are their priorities? What will they fund? What will they not? We do fund, and I think you'll find that ever since the beginning of COVID, many foundations have signed a philanthropic pledge to make their grant making less restrictive, right? To be more open to general operating. It's true, it used to be absolutely taboo. Now there are more foundations that understand that there is no mission without the ability to deliver mission, right? That your overhead, your salaries, your ability to pay rent, your ability to do your job costs something. So I think that is a really healthy trend in philanthropy, to understand, the true cost of providing this community service that you provide. But you do need to know at the time that you apply, is this that kind of grant? Is this that kind of foundation? Is this a programmatic grant? Will it cover salary? Will it cover overhead? Is it general operating? And then think strategically about what you're asking them for. And if you're thinking of your fundraising strategy as an overall picture, then you don't need to do this sort of shotgun approach of going everyone, everything all the time. You can be more surgical, more selective in what you're asking for, and then keep track. Right?
Yes, that is one of my things for nonprofits too, is tracking. Because, well, number one, you have reporting with grants. You will have to report back how the money got spent and how the project went. But also just, my teaching nonprofits how to operate like a business is always keeping track of things and showing your value. And that's part of what you have to do in a grant application as well, is, as we were talking earlier, you mentioned something about, having the heart and the head together. You may put it differently, probably more succinctly than I did. But, it's about showing that value. What is it that you're worth in the community? What will this program do for your organization and for the community that you serve? If a funder can't understand that, you may have the best program in the world, but if you can't prove that it will do any good, and vice versa, if you can prove that you can do the best thing in the world, but there's no one you're giving it to, or you're not going about it properly, you have to have both sides of that story. And so to me, it's a matter of, not just your whole funding plan for your organization, but the whole process of showing value in this particular program that you're applying for a grant for. What will it do? How will it do it? Why are you the best person to do it? I mean, I don't know if you've seen the course that I developed called the 5 Keys of Program Development. It's like, you have to show that there's a need. You have to show why you're the one to do it. You have to go through that whole narrative and not just tell the great story, but prove that you can do it. And this is what its value is. Do you see, or what, I'm going to ask you now, instead of the mistakes you see, what are the great things that you have seen some nonprofits do in ways that they have proven their value for their organization and their program in grant applications? Give me the best.
I love that. I love the flipping of the focus. I will tell you, for me, what makes a great application is when you have, as you said, sort of head and heart in equal measure, or another cliche to use would be sort of steak and sizzle in equal measure, right?
And now I'm hungry.
whether it's talking with your program officer or actually at the point of formally filling out an application, bringing both the mission, vision, value, sort of why this matters, what you could do with it, the kind of aspirational quality to it, right, of why it matters, as well as how are we going to, very nuts and bolts, how are we going to do it? What is it going to cost? What is our track record? What's our capacity to do this? And how do we know? What have we done up until now?
Mhm.
Because, and in my opinion, what makes a really strong request is having both in more or less equal measure, right? You can really help a person who does not work on the ground in your organization as closely as you do, understand why it matters, and then you can show them how you're going to do it. So I think that's one of the strongest piece of advice I can give is bring both to the table. And I love it when we see that. I'll give you, I don't know if it's a secret, but I will tell you truly and transparently that
we want all the secrets, Kirsten.
Foundation officers hate to see an application that somebody spent a lot of their precious time. Time for most nonprofits is their most precious commodity, right? And it is so heartbreaking, honestly heartbreaking, to see an application come in that that could have benefited from a quick conversation, right? Knowing that you spent time, which is money and effort and value, preparing something that we could have talked through, we could have anticipated in advance and either redirected or even given you some pointers or some tips on what to lean into. I would say the other thing on that list of good practices is to believe the cliche that often no doesn't mean no, it means not right now, right? And your comparison to business is a perfect one. If you were in sales, think how few sales you would actually make if you made a single cold call and then hung up the phone, right?
How many touches does it take to make the sale?
Yeah, you may not get a grant on the very first try, but now you have an in. Okay, now somebody knows you who didn't know you yesterday. You do have an in. And that is a wonderful opportunity. I would say, okay, I don't generally like to talk about here's mistakes people make, but something that I would encourage them to do would be, if you are rejected for a grant, if you are not successful in getting the grant and you're denied, almost any foundation would love to hear from you and talk about what comes next. It is actually a rule of our foundation that we will personally contact every applicant and say, do you have any questions? Do you want to know what comes next? Would you like any feedback? Right? Not every foundation is going to offer
I applaud that you do that.
But almost just about any foundation will do it if you ask them, right?
No, I was to say, but I'm surprised more applicants aren't doing that, because it's the first thing I always do when I get rejection of any kind, whether it's submission for something I wrote or a grant application, a job application, anything, is tell me why. Tell me why I didn't win this, why I didn't get this, what?
Well,
help me be better.
Then truthfully, then Jen, you're braver than 98% of the population.
Thank you.
I'll
take that. Let's end here. We're done.
I feel like it's oh no. But actually, it is a great opportunity to have that conversation and say, what do you see? What do you know? What advice do you have? What would you like to know about us for next time?
Right. And I feel like that, the meme that I posted today, where it's me trying to convince a funder why our missions are aligned, and this guy's, he's got maps and charts, and it's not that conversation. And I do see that, and this amazes me, because I am the stubbornest person you'll ever meet. But I feel like some of the applicants and nonprofits are just stubborn, well, if this one's not good enough for you, then we'll go somewhere else. And it's not about, it isn't about whether we like you or we don't like you. It's about, is this aligned and is it right? And if you ask the right questions, you may still have an opportunity with that grant you just got rejected from. It doesn't always have to be, we'll go with the Regis thing, your final answer. It might be, like you said, not right now. or
Right.
not this one, but we have another opportunity that's coming up in a few months that this is actually a better fit for, or, well, because you didn't check this box and, you know, had you called me first, good, you know. So there's so much
Either
to find
way,
out.
you're going to learn one of two things, and both of them are valuable. Either you will learn that this is never going to happen because it's just not a good match, and you never have to spend your time, your precious time, going after that particular track again, right? Or you'll learn that there is a possibility, and now you're talking. You know?
Now we're talking. So I'm going to ask you one more question before I let you go. What is more exciting to a funder, or maybe just particularly to you, to see a brilliant, a fabulous new program that someone is looking for funding for, or to see a well-established program with a good track record that is looking for future funding?
That is a great question, and it's a difficult one to know how to answer. It's a difficult one to answer, and so I think I'm going to say both and. In this sense, a funder is always looking for the applicant's ability to deliver on what they say they want to do. So in that sense, being established, having a proven track record, having a team in place, right, that has the capacity to do it and that can tell you how and why, right? And they know they can because they've done it, right? That is always very, very valuable. And I think in most funders, I mean, we're all a little bit different, but most funders that I know would be looking, you know, for some demonstration of what it is that makes you confident that it's you, right? As far as the program itself, I think it largely depends on on how responsive it is to some demonstrated need in the community, and or how good a match it is for the funder. We actually have a grant that is exclusive, one grant, one out of half a dozen different ones that we do. So it's worth knowing, you know, what's for what. Mm-hmm. We have one grant that is exclusively for brand new, never been done before ideas.
I
right?
like that.
But that's not our whole grant program. So again, knowing what it is that you're applying for and doing the homework first to understanding where's the match between what you want to do and what the funder wants to do, I would say is the best way to answer that question.
Well, good. I'm excited to hear that, because I know it's always exciting coming across brand new, innovative types of ideas and programs and things, but it's harder to prove what its result will be when it's brand new. And there's something to be said about the tried and true programs that have a track record, and you can say exactly, this is what we anticipate based on past performance.
You know what? Find out if your funder will fund a pilot. That is a great way to square that circle, right? If you want to try something that's never been done before, but it can never succeed if you don't try it, talk with your funder about whether they're open to funding a pilot. We've done that.
It's riskier, scarier, but yeah, good. And thank you so much for sharing earlier that funders are loosening up on general operating funds, because that I did not know. So that is good to know as someone who's trying to help some nonprofits. And yeah. Kirsten, thank you so much. It's always lovely to see you. I really appreciate you doing this with me.
It's always my pleasure. I love having this time together with you.
Thank you, and happy Valentine's Day.
And to you too.
For everybody watching, happy Valentine's Day, even if it's no longer Valentine's Day when you see this, but hopefully you will watch more of the Top Brass, and if you love it, please subscribe. Thank you.